on this episode of Sustainable Horizons.
Everybody wants clean energy, but they don't want any nuclear.
This facility processes 365,000 tons of waste each year, plus steam to heat both Target Field and all of downtown Minneapolis.
If we really want to reduce and really want to take the recycling part of that equation seriously, all the number 7 plastics that exist in the world are useless.
Waste to energy by incineration reduces landfill capacity by 87%. That is crazy.
Guess what?
What?
We're back for season 2.
Season 2. I'm excited.
I know.
And our topic is something that you and I are both very passionate about, and it's incredibly nuanced. And we're going to try to cover all the nuances of it.
Yes.
And that topic is waste to energy. Do you want to explain what waste to energy is?
Yeah, diving into an official definition, found this when I was doing a little bit of research. I think it's interesting how it envelops a lot of different things I didn't realize was considered waste to energy. The official definition is the conversion of non-recyclable waste materials into usable heat, electricity, or fuel through a variety of processes, including combustion, gasification, pyrolyzation, anaerobic digestion, and landfill gas recovery. This process is often called waste to energy.
For the sake of this episode, we're mostly going to be focusing on the combustion side, which is basically just burning trash for energy.
Yep.
Now, when you say that, people have like a very negative reaction because you kind of picture, maybe in the rural parts, or you think of people who live on the streets who have to burn trash, and that creates a lot of pollution. So there's a lot of drawback. But there's actually a lot more that goes into this on this large-scale industrial level, and there's a long history on this.
In fact, the first incinerator in the United States was built in 1885 on Governor's Island in New York City.
New York.
At that point in time, little was known about the environmental impacts of the water discharge and air emissions from these incinerators. So kind of roll around to the 1970s when the Clean Air Act came into effect and existing incinerator facilities could no longer uncontrollably burn municipal solid waste. They faced restrictions on particulate emissions. Turned out a lot of these factories had to close because they couldn't install or didn't install the technology needed to meet the Clean Air Act. Oftentimes, these technologies are going to be the emissions capture that you won't see it. But when you see these facilities with the steam coming out of it, it's going to be clean air and steam because they run through all these filters before they kind of head out. Despite all this, combustion of municipal solid waste grew into the 1980s, and by the early 1990s, more than 15% of all waste was burned for energy, which is kind of a huge thing back then. But if you think about it, in the 1970s, that was kind of when our Al Gore era, when we were like almost on the precipice of like making real climate change.
Yeah, so the 1970 Clean Air Act was during the Nixon administration, but then Al Gore came in as the famous environmental activist he is.
Kind of progressive for its time in the 1990s to have that much of our waste turned into energy. It's kind of not a renewable resource, but definitely an alternative energy resource that we are tapping into at that time. But in that era, new threats of mercury and dioxide emissions from the EPA enacted the Maximum Achievable Control Technology, or MACT, regulations in the 90s. As a result, most running facilities had to be retrofitted with air pollution control systems or shut down. Again, similar to what those stacks I was talking about, the filter system going up. They just had to have stricter control on those.
To echo your point, what you're seeing when what's coming out, it's steam, it's water vapor. There are still going to be some emissions of various kinds, which we'll hit on in a little bit, but it's at very small levels, similar to any sort of manufacturing facility that you'd see. Another point that you made is that it's not considered renewable energy, but this is a great opportunity to talk about the waste hierarchy, which we're all familiar with: reduce, reuse, recycle. But the next two is incineration, also known as waste to energy, and then landfill. Now, this is going to be a huge talking point as we go throughout the episode. But before we dive into like the pros and cons of this all, the Scandinavian people, as is typical with all things sustainability, are doing a great job with this stuff. For example, Finland is currently a net importer of trash, for waste to energy. Because whenever you talk to waste to energy people, they're very clear to tell you that they are a power plant, not a waste disposal facility. That's another key point.
Because their whole goal is to make energy or heat for the local community. So they're providing a service, not necessarily just a removal process. Speaking of Scandinavia, another fun project over in that area is Copenhill, which is a waste-to-energy ski slope. A super fun concept located in, and I might butcher it, but Amager in Copenhagen. You're nodding. Is that good?
I'll ask my dad later.
Oh, there you go. Amager?
My dad's from Sweden, by the way, guys. He's there right now.
Fun. Located in Amager in Copenhagen, Copenhill is a waste-to-energy plant topped with a ski slope, hiking trails, and even a climbing wall. The power plant plays a part in Copenhagen's goal of becoming the world's first carbon-neutral city by 2025. It's combining an architectural landmark with an urban recreation center. So during the summer months, you're often going to find people on this rooftop doing park activities like hiking the trails. There's a playground, even fitness structures, running trails. And then the climbing wall is actually pretty cool. We'll send some links in the description along with some photos if you guys want to take a peek at that.
It is massive.
It is. It goes up the whole side of the building. So very cool and very thought out recreational space included on the top and sides and overall in the land use of this kind of building. In the winter months, there are ski slopes that account to roughly 1,600 feet of slope. You and your friends can go down 1,600 feet worth of space in the winter times, which is just such a cool concept. I know that in the Netherlands, there's the indoor ski slope area. So like this is kind of a similar concept, I feel, to that. They just kept it outdoors and it has its own summertime and wintertime use. This building opened or officially completed in 2019. At the time, the project was the single largest environmental initiative in Denmark with a budget of 3.5 billion Danish kroner. Beneath the slopes, a furnace, steam, and turbines convert over 440,000 tons of waste annually, which is enough clean energy to deliver electricity and district heating for 150,000 homes. So this is a huge undertaking. I don't know the percentages that this is of the city's waste that is being converted to energy, but 440,000 tons are being diverted from the landfill, which I think is a huge undertaking, from the oceans, from all the places that our trash ends up leaking into. But I know Logan has a more localized project that we can talk about.
So here in Minneapolis, we have the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center, also known as the HERC. And so a key note here, kind of continuing off that Copenhagen example, is residents and businesses in Hennepin County generate about 800,000 tons of garbage every year that isn't recycled or composted. And the HERC, which is Waste to Energy Facility, processes 365,000 tons of that waste every year.
It's almost half.
That's a huge portion.
Yeah.
And a couple more of the pros of it is that a ton of waste processed at the HERC creates electricity to run a house for 21 days, plus steam to heat both Target Field, which is the baseball stadium here, and all of downtown Minneapolis, which is one of the larger cities. I think it's like 19th. Don't quote me on that. It powers about 25,000 homes. And for every ton of trash burned at the HERC, produces fewer tons of greenhouse gas emissions than if it were disposed of in a landfill, because decomposing garbage in landfills produces methane. And methane is over 20 more times potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide over a 100-year span. Lastly, picture it. It's just a large pit, basically, that's burning. And this includes everything that you've ever thrown in the trash, plus mattresses, and all the crazy things that you can think of, which includes metals. And one thing that they do is when they're cleaning out the ash from these facilities, is they're able to recover 16,000 tons of scrap metal every single year, as well as precious metals as well. Things like gold, copper, things that you will get used in your electronics, which is incredibly important. However, the HERC has been in the news lately because recently there have been plans from the Hennepin County Commission to set a new timeline to shut the plant down sometime between 2028 and 2040. Why, you might ask, after all these glowing things that we just said? Well, local environmental activists, especially environmental justice activists, have pointed out that the zip codes just north and just east of the HERC have the second and third highest rates of asthma in the Minneapolis metropolitan area, meaning these populations are particularly vulnerable to this additional pollution. Because the HERC is also the 31st largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the entire state, according to the EPA, it also puts out particulate matter. So when we're saying that it's mostly water vapor, there's also these tiny little particles, particulate matter. Of PM 2.5, it puts out 21 tons of particulate matter, and PM 10 puts out 23 tons. Those are second and fourth most in Hennepin County. The population within the 3-mile radius of the HERC is also 49% low income and 49% population of color. So environmental activists have been arguing that the HERC is putting unnecessary stress on these already marginalized communities.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, we did talk about how they do have emissions capture. Now, I heard you guys to look up EPA's environmental justice map because it includes things like asthma rates and other health. And if you pull it up, it's right, you see right around the HERC, which is in North Loop, Minneapolis, which is just south of North Minneapolis, which is the historically Black neighborhood in the area. They have higher asthma rates. Critics who push back against these environmental activists will push back that North Minneapolis is north of the city, whereas North Minneapolis is north of the HERC, whereas wind, generally speaking, blows from west to east. So most of the emissions from the HERC are actually impacting downtown and North Loop, which is recently the most affluent part of the city. So there is a lot of hotly contested debate over this. But I think the main point is that waste to energy is not a perfect solution. It's not the ideal solution. Because one of the things that is part of this legislation is that they know that they can't just shut it down. They also have to start investing the similar amount of money that they put towards the HERC into pollution prevention. So point source pollution prevention, meaning stopping waste being generated before it's even generated, by doing things like mandating that manufacturers can only use recyclable materials, increasing recycling infrastructure, compost infrastructure, which we're very fortunate in the Twin Cities region to have a lot of already. But a lot of work needs to be done because, like Ed said earlier, it's 800,000 tons of garbage that needs to be managed, and the HERC is only covering 365,000 tons. Taylor and I thought this would be a great opportunity to just run down kind of some of the pros and cons that we've already kind of hit on, but just start listing them and then kind of discussing how we feel about it, because it's not a cut and clear yes, no solution. Did you want to start with pros or cons first?
So the pros are we can manage our waste streams and they don't go to landfills. A con to that is some of the pollution, even though it's being filtered out, still gets through this particulate matter and causes health issues like asthma in certain areas around facilities that do this combustion waste to energy process. Another pro is being able to think creatively on how we can integrate systems like this in a way of like Copenhill is, where we can kind of have people in and up and around and make a recreational space out of it. Kind of a dual purpose to this whole process.
To your point of the reducing landfill, a fun little fact, I don't know if you've heard this, is waste to energy by incineration reduces landfill capacity by 87%. So like this isn't just like a small little chunk that we're reducing. It's 87% volume. That is crazy because it's been in the news of we need to build more landfills. Our landfills are overflowing, especially after all this stuff where we have been sending our quote unquote recycling that ends up it's really mostly trash to China and other parts of Southeast Asia. And they've said, nope, we're not taking it anymore. That trash needs to go somewhere. And where it's going to go, as it stands, is landfill.
Because we don't have the recycling infrastructure here in the States to handle that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And another point that I think doesn't get talked enough about, it's leachate. So leachate is a term regarding landfills. is that it's all that organic matter and other types of liquids that get dumped in the trash slowly leak out from landfills. Landfills have linings and other forms of protection that try to prevent that, but inevitably, over time, leachate's gonna leach, hence its name. And waste to energy all but eliminates leachate because, again, it's being incinerated. All of that water in the organic matter and everything else that's any liquid, these things are hot, is being evaporated off. So it's getting rid of that leachate. And I think that that's a super important aspect of this whole system and why it's number 4 on the waste hierarchy above number 5, landfill.
Yeah. And I mean, we often see these images of the garbage patches in the oceans or in the rivers and how polluted they are. If we can eliminate that and harness its energy and heat instead and use it for homes and residential and commercial in those areas, it's way better off than turning into the microplastics in the ocean and all of these things, the leachate and polluting our groundwater and all these other issues that we see with landfills or the lack of landfills in some of these countries.
I love that you brought up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch because that is another huge part. Is we've covered plastics already in our plastic packaging episode, but if I remember correctly, it's 4 to 6% of plastic is currently being recycled, which is
nothing.
Abysmal.
Yeah. It's crazy because all these companies out there are like made of 80% recycled material.
Well, that's already recycled material, and that's pretty much not going to be recycled again.
I just like, where are they getting that? Like, we got that much plastic that the 4 to 6% can then turn into 80% in all these products? It seems crazy to me.
That's a good point. But I think another thing that we have to remember in regards to waste to energy is plastic products. Plastic is made out of what? Petroleum, gas. And so it makes a great fuel that we can recapture. Again, it is not reducing, it is not reusing, and it is not recycling. But to the point of recycling, even if you do put it in the recycling bin, so often it's going to be put in the recycling bin, taken to the recycling sorting facility, and then it's deemed not recyclable or not caught, or the million bajillion reasons of why it's not captured there. And then it gets put on its own dumpster and then brought to the landfill still, or brought to the waste to energy facility. So kind of the pessimistic side of me is like, just send it straight to a waste to energy facility. It's a great fuel source, and at least it's better than it ending up in nature.
I think an important thing to think about, I don't have any answers on this right now, but I want to pose the question of, we are burning this energy, this waste into energy and harnessing it. When you recycle, the process of actually recycling it, burning it back down, and producing a new product causes more emissions again. And recycling is always a great thing because we're reusing it instead of just burning off. And I'm a big proponent of that, but I'm curious what that life cycle looks like if you're looking at those. Like, is it the most useful thing to do to recycle plastic specifically? I think there are other materials out there that are highly recyclable. Don't burn, like say glass. Like, you're not going to burn glass for energy. And glass is a very energy intensive process to reuse again as well. But there are things out there that can be reused. And since we understand that plastics is so little of it is recycled, that maybe this is just kind of the best option. I don't know if it's the right question to pose, but it is something that I think about now, kind of talking about this, is waste to energy is a great thing, but how high on the pedestal can we put it? You know, recycling is obviously better still, but is it one day we're going to turn around and say, actually, waste to energy is the way to go because we harness more use out of it that way and less emissions?
What you're bringing up is another huge con to waste to energy. And it's this argument that you're making. It's that it creates a justification to keep generating trash so that we can then burn it. And it's creating kind of a market incentive to do it because we're already, and another con is you had mentioned 3.5 billion Danish kroner. I don't know what the
translation equals,
it's into US dollars, but I know billions a lot. I also know that the HERC costs taxpayers a lot of money to run. And so these things aren't cheap. They're way more expensive than landfills. And so I do think you bring up a very valid point in the sense that recycling isn't great for things like plastic, but for something like metals where we have to mine it and that's extremely destructive to the environment, it's way better to recycle that. But for things like plastics, is we really have to figure something out where we start legislating that you can only make these 3 types of plastic or something like that, and they have to be recycled.
I think that is so necessary. If we really want to reduce and really want to take the recycling part of that equation seriously, it's all the number 7 plastics that exist in the world are useless.
Because as a reminder, 7 just means other.
And it's oftentimes the recycled plastics that you get because it's a mixture of all these different plastics being combined together, or it's the compostable things that don't end up in a composting facility. Those can't be recycled. And so it's really hard to separate those out from the number 5s and the 1s of the world that are easy to recycle. So I do think legislative measures against plastic and what you can produce would make a world of difference in this conversation. And waste energy probably wouldn't need to be a thing because we could truly recycle most things, or compost. I know there's a crazy statistic out there where it's like, if everybody composted, we'd have like 40% less trash in our landfills because it's that much food and different cardboards that can be recycled, So between those 2 things, we could definitely make an impact on the trash that we're leaving in our oceans and landfills and things like that.
And then that kind of like brings me to just like my personal feelings around this is that, frankly, I've been kind of pissed off with the announcement of the HERC closure. We're like, oh, we just need to invest in point source prevention. I'm like, yeah, we do. But also, what's your plan?
Yeah.
There are people that are working on it. How much money are you actually going to invest in that? And there's already 800,000 tons being generated in just this city. And the HERC's not even catching half of that. And it's got to go somewhere. And it starts to become a very NIMBY, not in my backyard type of argument where they're like, we don't want to have this here. I'm like, well, if it's not here, it's elsewhere. And I think that there is legitimacy to the environmental justice concerns. But do landfills get made?
Right.
Indigenous communities? Poor communities? It's going to go somewhere.
Right.
And I get not wanting to have it in your backyard, but it's got to be in someone's yard. And just because Minneapolis has more money than other people doesn't mean it shouldn't be our responsibility. And it's something that makes me very upset.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. And I think that's why I personally got into sustainability. It's a complex problem. There is not a silver bullet that's going to come save our day. This topic alone has 4 or 5 different solutions that need to be enacted to make something positive kind of happen. Truth is, like 800,000 tons of trash a year needs to be reduced. That just can't be the normal. And as the population grows, because it does, that number is just going to climb. So first we need to reduce in our hierarchy of everything. And so how much of that program goes towards that? How much is that focused on the companies that are making these products that we have to tear open and throw away so much of this plastic and trash and things that just can't be recycled? And then how do we focus on reusing the things that are in our own home? Do we make them more durable? As if everything's moving back to like metal and glass containers, higher energy intensive, but if we don't have to keep buying it anymore, is that the payoff, right? Do we have to invest that energy up front so we don't have it on the back end? Is that the solution? Part of it, probably. And then recycling, talking about the legislative measures that you can take and reducing it down to the 3 different types of plastic and only allowing those to exist. and letting one of them be compostable. And then it's a compost program along with the recycling so that you're not throwing away all your food scraps and these plastics that are now so commonplace in your coffee shops and restaurants. I work at a restaurant. We use compostable everything. Straws compostable, but we throw them in the trash. And I've asked so many times to the owners and things like that. And they're like, we want to, believe me, because they do. They have a initiative in sustainability, but they rent out of the building that they're in. So they're like, if the building doesn't have compost, we can't do compost.
Compostable products are only as good as the compost infrastructure that is available.
Right. And I know they're spending the extra money to get these high quality, high end, sustainable products, but they're not doing any good. And I've tried to explain that, and there's only so much they can do because the building needs to take it into their own hands, and they don't have room for a compost build or a compost structure on site. And then the ability for that to be picked up easily every week or every few days. God knows we go through a lot of food at a restaurant that is being thrown out. But yeah, that alone is 6 or 7 different solutions that need to be implemented, and we start to look at the problem and reduce it. And it's not even the full solution because there's still going to be things that arise coming on later. But it's like, how do you get that just global mindset to kind of change around this topic in a positive way? Because I think a lot of times, the zero waste movement doesn't always get the most love, you want to say. Like it's hard.
It is so hard.
I don't do it very well. Like it's not an easy thing to do, to go to a grocery store and go down the food aisle and get things that you need and come home with very little. You have to be so intentional. It's not convenient.
And even then, it's borderline impossible. And I think that that's the thing that gets on my nerves sometimes with these activists, is that they live in this such idealistic world. And I think it's the difference between activists and practitioners, is all their points is the particulate matter, increased asthma rates, it's expensive for the city, it creates a market for us to continue to generate trash. You're correct. You are 100% right. I agree with you. But what's your solution? And the point to all the points you just made is we don't have those answers yet. I agree that we need to work in that direction, but what are we doing in the meantime? How are we handling it in the meantime? And we haven't even really hit that much on the energy and steam benefits that, if not from the trash that we already produce, we're getting from coal or natural gas. Then the argument is, well, we need more solar panels and more wind turbines and more renewable forms of energy, which again, I agree. But that stuff takes a long time to build out, which we're going to do an episode on electrification where we'll hit more on why and how that works. But it takes a long time, and it takes a long time for a reason. So what are we doing in the meantime?
Right. It's kind of like a little bit of that nuclear energy question, right? Everybody wants clean energy, but they don't want any nuclear. And I think that there are a lot of people out there that are, or not a lot, but there are some people out there, some of those activists, they're purists a little bit, right? And the harsh reality is a purist doesn't get very far in their approach to certain things. Because if you can't compromise, you're not going to get everybody on board, especially people in political offices. They have too many other people breathing down their neck. They can't give you the 100% pure answer. And I am totally for coming from a pure standpoint in the beginning and compromising down. Because you can't start at the compromise and then compromise further. Like, so I totally understand that you kind of need to come in with all your armor on, ready to battle it out, but understanding you're probably going to have to take off a few of your guards. It's a complex problem, and I think that's what's so fun about sustainability and so challenging, is like you have to think of the whole system and how it all interacts with each other and the different things like that.
I totally agree, because it's none of these things are easy. And yeah, you do have to start from your idealist world and work your way down, but still an inch forward is progress. but some quote unquote wins, like some activists viewed the closing of the HERC as a win. I think it's just a creation of other problems. And I think you actually have to listen to the true practitioners and experts in this area and trust that they know what they're talking about.
You can empathize with both sides.
For sure. And I mean, to the point of the HERC, they're pushing it back to 2028 to 2040, which is...
It's actually a long time. That's like enough time that you hope another solution can kind of come forward. And hopefully they have something in place that can replace in a better way, right?
And so, like, my hope is, like, I work for a pollution prevention nonprofit. And so my hope is that the county goes, hey, we're going to shut this down by 2040. So with that, we're going to start giving the money we've been giving to the HERC and start pushing that towards you guys and other people like you so that you can hire more workers and get out to these businesses and work in these different areas to do point source reduction on this waste. That's the ideal. But it's going to take a long time and a lot of money and investment and putting your money where your mouth is to actually get it done.
I think this has been a fun episode.
I like this new format.
I think it's more fun to just hang out and talk about these different things in a little bit of a different way. Bringing some facts, bringing some history, and then bringing it kind of local and real problems right in our backyard.
All right, we'll stop patting ourselves on the back. See y'all next time.
Until the next episode. Bye.